The House on Oakview by David Jones. We drove to Oakview just before dusk because that's when the street looks like itself. When porches go amber and the maples pull their shadows across the grass like quilts. The address is still on my license, even though I haven't lived in Cleveland since I was a kid. It's a little lie I tell the DMV and myself. Still standing, I said to Dee, as if I'd expected the house to just pack up and leave without us. The front steps. The front steps knew the weight of me. And you can tell when wood recognizes you. It gave that old familiar groan, and I answered with the old familiar joke I always say, more for myself than for her. Same song, second verse. Bentley, our coonhound, paused at the sidewalk and watched a fallen leaf move as if something small and invisible had picked it up by the stem. And then he trotted after us, nails clicking, his tag chiming, Bentley. The key fought my hand because time stands still here. It gums up the lock, wedges behind the hinge pins, makes the air feel thicker. I could hear the hallway clock on the other side, still ticking. My grandfather wound it every Sunday, but he died more than 10 years ago. I don't know who's been winding it now. The door opened onto the kind of quiet that has shape. You know it the second you step inside a house where no one's spoken for years. It's a quiet that's learned the rooms, that's easy at the edges and heavy in the corners. Dust had draped everything in lace. The couch was still wearing its summer slipcovers. My grandmother's crocheted throw blanket slept on the arm like a cat. Whoa, Dee said softly, like we just walked into a church. She squeezed my hand and lifted her chin towards the kitchen. I can smell coffee. I did too. Coffee and Old Spice and furniture polish. Smells that have no business being alive when the people who wore them aren't. Oakview keeps the hour. It also keeps the scent. We'll only stay tonight, I told her, like the house could hear and take offense. We'll inventory tomorrow, then head back, and we'll decide everything else after that. She nodded. Then let it be tonight. Bentley slipped past us down the hall with his tail up, confident until he reached the spare room. And there he stopped and sat down, very carefully, as if someone had asked him nicely to be good. His ears were forward, his eyes were bright, just watching the empty doorway as if the emptiness might blink. The spare room was where my grandfather kept the shortwave radio. He liked to listen to people he'd never meet talk about places he'd never see. And the radio's black box sat where it always had, under the picture window, with the antenna coiled around its belly like a sleeping snake. I'll get the utilities going, I said. We'll need heat if we're sleeping here tonight. It'll get cold. Careful with the furnace, Dee said, because she knows me. Open a window first. I opened two. One in the kitchen and one in the hallway. Enough to let the house exhale. Then I turned the thermostat from off to heat. The old pipes started clearing their throats under the floorboards, a slow rattle that turned into a low, steady hum. We moved in like we had the right. Duffel on the couch, Toothbrushes lined in a row on the bathroom sink like soldiers. Water running until it didn't come out brown. I found towels in the hall closet, folded the way only my grandmother folded towels, with that extra little tuck at the corner that kept the stack from slumping. My hand remembered it as if my hand were hers. We ate takeout at the kitchen table because we were afraid to cook. It tasted like food you eat when you don't want to make memories with it. Bentley lay at my feet and sighed into the pattern worn into the linoleum by my grandfather's chair. The clock in the hallway kept the right time, or at least it kept a time that was right for here. Its tick, steady and a little too loud, filled the half silences between our sentences. "What are you thinking?" Dee asked. "That it smells like Sunday morning." "What does Sunday morning smell like?" "Coffee and aftershave. And a newspaper big enough to blanket a dog." Bentley thumped his tail like he could remember it too. I reached down and rubbed the soft place behind his ear. "Gray ears, buddy. Gray ears." We've had Bentley for a while now, and he's gotten older, and that's kind of our game. I've noticed the years take the toll on him, but he still has that spark in his eyes. His tag tapped the floor in time with the clock. Bentley, Bentley, Bentley. When I carried our overnight bag back down the hall, the spare room pulled at me like a thought you can't finish. The door was open. It had been closed. I told myself air does that in an old house, like a lung switching sides. I stepped in because that's the kind of person I am, and stood still because that's the kind of person the room required. It was exactly as he'd left it. The radio, the stamp collection, the cigar box, even though there were no cigars. The picture of me with a gap in my front tooth holding a fish I pretended I'd caught. The calendar on the wall, June of a year I didn't want to say out loud. The square for the day he died was blank, because nobody knows to write death down when it's happening. The radio wasn't plugged in. I reached towards the cord, then stopped. My fingers tingled as if they'd already touched it and been reminded not to. I let my hand drop and back away, not because I was afraid, I told myself, but because I didn't want to wake anything. Dee's voice came from down the hallway. "You okay?" "Yeah." "Find anything?" "Just time." We made up the bed in my grandparents' room because the idea of sleeping anywhere else felt like trespassing. The sheets were clean in a way that only linen can be. The line of sun smell baked into them like bread. Dee lay on her side facing the window, and I laid on mine facing her. And Bentley took the floor by my feet and let his head rest. "I like the sound here," she whispered. "It's soft." "It's the vents," I said. "They carry everything." We weren't old enough to talk like old people, but that's what you do in houses like this. You inherit the voices along with the dishes. We drifted. The clock in the hallway counted the drifting. Sometime later, I woke to a whisper that wasn't Dee's and wasn't mine. It had the angle of a voice crossing a far room. It had the temperature of basement air. It had my name in it. David. I could have imagined it. I wanted to say I imagined it. The house sighed in places old houses sigh, and sometimes a sigh is a name if you're half asleep. I didn't move. The ceiling fan hummed the note of an old pop song you don't know the words to anymore, only the taste of them. Down the hall, something clicked on. A click and a low fizz, like a cigarette lit by somebody else's hand. The shortwave radio. I knew the sound of it before the sound knew itself. I didn't wake Dee because she'd wake if I wanted her to. I slid out of bed without turning on a light and walked the quiet by memory. The house didn't need lights to know me. My shoulder brushed the hallway wallpaper and the little wavy leaves brushed back. The spare room was lit by radio glow. It's a particular kind of light. It's green and patient. The dial shone like a full moon in a small, polite sky. The cord was still trailing from the back, plugged into nothing. The sound was clear. A man's voice, careful and warm, speaking like he knew he might be overheard by a child. "And now the names," the voice said, steady through a curtain of static. Names. The hair on my arm rose like the floor had turned colder. From the east side, Clifton, St. Clair. We remember them tonight. Obituaries. My grandfather used to read the obituaries out loud sometimes, not because he was morbid, but because he was faithful. They were prayers with addresses. I stood very still and listened to a town talk about itself. And we remember Ruth Bednar, mother, teacher, who loved parades and boiled candy, age 82. Ruth had lived 2 doors down and gave out tough little wrapped mints that tasted like perfume. I had heard she'd passed. The voice had the timing of news that knew it wasn't new anymore and was gentle with itself. And we remember. The radio hiccuped, and the voice turned into the weather. I could hear under the static the suggestion of something else. Footsteps in dry grass, a train a long way off, dishes being put away in a kitchen you wouldn't visit. I reached out because that's the kind of person I am, and I touched the side of the radio as if it had a fever. Warm. Of course it was warm. My palm remembered the heat from when I was 8, sitting here on a Sunday afternoon pretending not to nap. David, Dee's voice behind me, quiet and intact. She was outlined in the hallway like an old photograph. I didn't want to wake you. You didn't. She stepped to the doorway but didn't come in. Bentley's standing in the kitchen, just standing, not asking to go out, not asking for water. It's like he's listening. So am I. And I nodded toward the radio, as if you can nod toward a voice. It's reading names. She tilted her head like you do when you can almost hear a thing someone else hears. I dreamed cookies. You dreamed cookies? She smiled. My grandmother's house. 3 a.m. Cookies and radio baseball. Isn't memory weird? On Oakview, memory is just another appliance. We went back to bed because that's where the warmth was, and maybe because part of us thought if we slept like we belonged here, the house might let us go when it was time. I lay awake and watched Dee's face float in the light from the window. It was a good room for sleeping and an excellent room for not. I woke to the impression of footsteps on the stairs. Not loud, not threatening, the plain fact of them climbing. When you grew up in a house, your body knows it sounds better than your ears do. And my body told me someone was coming up to check if I was asleep. I held very still and let the person be my grandfather, because that was the shape of the thought I wanted. The steps reached the top, then stopped as if the person who'd climbed them had remembered something and turned back. Dee murmured and rolled toward me. Her hand found mine. The hallway clock set a time that was later than it should be. I decided to be asleep. When morning came, or what passes for morning in a room that doesn't open its eyes anymore, we made coffee in the old Mr. Coffee that hadn't known a day since the Browns wore the right kind of uniform. It worked. Of course it worked. The filters were still in the drawer, fan-folded paper, taller than I remembered because I was smaller then. The house looked cleaner in daylight. Everything wrong with it hit at noon, and everything right with it admitted it had been right all along. Dee propped open the back door to let the coffee steam drift out. Bentley positioned himself at the threshold like a guard who also liked sun. "You good?" she asked, reading my face like a line she'd memorized years ago. "I'm good." I wasn't lying. I wanted to say, I'm good here. You can be good in the wrong place. That's how places like this work. We spent the morning taking pictures for a future listing I refused to picture. The dining room, the stair rail polished to a shine by 2 generations of hands, the wallpaper where a chair had scuffed a bouquet of dahlias until it looked like wind. In the pantry, I found a grocery list in my grandmother's handwriting. Milk, eggs, flour, yeast, cinnamon. That might as well have been a poem. Dee photographed it gently, like light photographing itself. "Did we tell your mom?" she asked. "Let her know we came?" "I'll text her." I typed, but didn't send it. I'll call her later. By afternoon, the house was friendly enough to forget itself. We put on a local radio station to feel less like we were eavesdropping on the past, and the man with the same voice as the night before gave the weather in a tone I never knew I missed. Chance of rain, chance of being forgiven if you come home. We walked Bentley along the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the curb because that's where he preferred to leave his notes. Oakview felt smaller from the street than it did from inside. The houses held their breaths. You could see in the way the hedges grew, where porches were still used and which had become decorations. A man waved from a porch I half remembered and said my name like I'd only been gone a week. "Hey, David, you're back." "I'm here," I said, careful with the grammar of it. Then, because I'm my grandfather's grandson, I said, "You doing all right?" "Always," he said. Always almost. He smiled in a way that meant he'd meant the joke and something else. We slept that night in real earnest because the day had made muscles out of us. The house cooled and the house warmed. We loved the way people do in old rooms. Softer. Dee put her head on my chest and listened to me the way you listen to a station that's almost clear. Bentley dreamed. His paws did that little running things dogs do when they're chasing a rabbit in a place they've never been. At some hour, the kind of hour that refuses to be named, I heard the radio again. No click, no fanfare, just a voice where no wire ran. And we remember. Don't, Dee whispered without waking. I don't know if she meant me or the house. I got up anyway because that's what I do when I'm told to stay still. I walked the hall with my palm against the wall for no reason and for every reason. In the spare room, the radio's light poured into the corner like it had found a place to sleep. The voice was halfway through a list of streets. Kinsman, Lorraine, Oakview. It said our street like it was a person. In the kitchen, something scraped just once. Not a rat, not a branch, not the wind, and not the house settling. The sound had the exact politeness of a chair being pulled out for a guest. And I moved toward it without looking where my feet were. The kitchen knew morning without light. That's one of those things I love about kitchens. They always believe in breakfast. In the middle of the table sat a plate, and on the plate sat 3 cookies, just barely darker than gold. The smell said cinnamon and brown sugar and something I couldn't name right away because I only knew it in the presence of love. Dee stood in the doorway, hair wild, eyes soft with sleep. She didn't look shocked. She looked like she had expected cookies and I was late to the expectation. My dream, she said, and the sound of her voice made the plate look more real. Don't eat it, I said, immediately to my own surprise. I wasn't going to. She rubbed her arm. It's too nice. We both laughed because that sentence is how you survive things like this. A soft chime sounded from the hallway. Not a phone, not anything we own. It had the exact same pitch of the doorbell, but wrong. Like someone had recorded our bell on a cassette tape in 1996 and left it on a dashboard. Bentley barked. One small bark with a question mark. He didn't go to the door. He looked at the floor vent under the kitchen table and wagged once like someone had said his name. Then he lay down with his chin on the metal grate and sighed the sigh of a dog who has placed himself exactly where he belongs. I crouched. The vent breathed the house breath. It breathed the thread of cool and something old. And I put my hand over it and I felt a draft that moved on purpose. David. The voice in the vent was not the radio voice. It was the voice of someone who had known my name when I was shorter. I didn't answer. I wanted to, but I didn't. I looked up and found Dee's eyes, and we had the conversation couples have without words, where each tells the other, I am here, I am not here, I am afraid, I am yours. David. The voice was quieter, as if it had been a long way and was tired. Don't forget the basement window. The basement window. You could smell those words. Damp cement, old paint, spider silk that sparkles like a lie. I stood up because that's what you do when an old voice mentions a basement. I went down because that's what houses like this expect. The light string caught my fingers on the first try. The bulb blinked itself awake like an old cat and showed me a room that had been careful with itself. Mason jars, paint cans chalked with their own dust. The little workbench that had been the stage where my grandfather performed his performances, changing watch batteries, oiling hinges, making small things whole. On the workbench, right next to the vise, lay a note in his handwriting on an index card. Side window sticks don't force. The side window was above the washing machine, a rectangle cut into stone. It was propped with a piece of wood, my doing at 10 years old, because I liked tools. The wood had warped, the window had slipped between its meanings, neither open nor closed, as if it were waiting to decide. Don't forget the basement window, the voice had said. Because here the air can turn. Because here, if you forget, the house remembers for you. And sometimes the house is wrong. I pulled the warp stick free and found a better one. And I set the window properly, open enough to keep the air honest. I stood there with my hand on the sill like you put your hand on a shoulder at a funeral and say nothing. Not because there's nothing to say, but because the saying doesn't help the person and does help you. When I came back up, Dee had wrapped the cookies in paper towels and set them in the oven, which was off. Keeps the smell from following you, she said. Like her grandmother again, like mine. Bentley was snoring into the vent. The radio said, "And we remember." And then the static made a sound like wind through corn, and I thought ridiculously of July in a year I was 9, and my grandfather took me to a field and made me listen to nothing until the nothing started listing names. Swallow, milkweed, the small thing that clicks once and is done. We went back to bed because we were outmatched. And that's an honest thing to be. I slept or performed the part of sleep until the hallway clock took me by the shoulder. And when I opened my eyes, the window had let in morning like it wasn't a choice. I stood, stretched, listened for small mercies. Dee's breath. Bentley's toenails flexing on the floor. The house decided not to show us anything for a few hours. In the kitchen, the radio was quiet. The shortwave dial a dark moon. The plate was empty. The oven was a good place to put things if you don't want to look at them. And the coffee tasted suspiciously like coffee and not like a metaphor. For a soft, disorienting moment, I thought, we imagined it all. Because that's one of the ways Oakview loves you. It gives you the permission to doubt. On the table lay the newspaper. Not the paper. The paper is what you get today. This was a newspaper. Edges yellowed, folded once as if someone had read it with clean hands. The Plain Dealer. The date across the top was not yesterday's, and not the year my grandfather died, and not last month when I'd finally texted my mother. Maybe it's time. No. The date was today. The headline was baseball and weather and schools. And the middle page was obituaries. I didn't want to pick it up. It felt like a trick invented for dumb people in the movies who pick things up and then deserve exactly what they get. So I stood there and I looked, and the thing that happened, that always happens in houses you loved as a child. The house paraded your better selves in front of you and picked the one with the bravest face. So I picked up the paper and I turned to the page that tells the truth about everyone. I read the names I knew and names I didn't, and names I remembered when I was small because they ran the deli counter or the corner store or the church choir. I read into the column where the print gets tight. I read my own last name as if it had nothing to do with me, and then in the sharp little gap where your eyes pretend they don't understand how letters become the world, I read my name. Jones. David L., 55, of the East Side. Beloved partner of Delora. Friend to dogs and radios. Known for stories and for staying up too late. Passed peacefully in his sleep at the Oakview residence. Survived by... The line ended there. Not because the column ended, but because my eyes did. I folded the paper along a crease someone else had made for me and set it down very carefully because in that moment, it felt like setting something down could save a life. My hands did the work your hands do when they don't know the prayer but recognize the posture. David, Dee's voice came from the hallway. She was awake. She was the day. She had no idea, but she was also the night. Don't come in yet, I said, which meant nothing in any language we speak to another. Because she came in anyway, because she's a person who walks towards the voice that loves her. She saw the paper where I had put it, and the way I was standing, and the way the room had made itself small. What is it? I shook my head because shaking your head is the lie you tell people you love when you haven't learned how to say the truth yet. She reached for the paper and I put my hand on hers and said her name in the old way. 3 letters long and bigger with any luck. She pressed my fingers once like you press a doorbell. She lifted the page and read the part a person who has always been brave reads first. She stopped at my name. She stopped. Only the clock kept going. I'm not reading the rest, she said. You don't have to. She put the newspaper down next to the plate where the cookies had been and the ring of coffee and took a slow breath that added years to both of us. Bentley walked in, stretched, sneezed in the direction of the oven, and then sat in the doorway between kitchen and hall like a soldier who's also a boy. Tail 3 wags beats behind his happiness. Okay, Dee said finally, and her voice did the bravest thing a voice can do. Nothing you didn't have to. Okay. We'll leave, I said. And then because the house had taught me to be honest with myself, if not to it, we'll try. Oakview doesn't lock you in by force. It does it with the kind of patience that beat out empires. We cleaned up in a hurry that didn't change the speed of anything that mattered. We folded sheets because that's what you do for a room when you're a person who wants to stay a person. We gathered our things and left the house as if we were backing away from something we loved without turning our back on it. Because turning your back in houses like this is how you end up living here forever. At the front door, I remembered the basement window. I went back to check it because sometimes you get a second chance to be who an old voice asked you to be. It was still propped, the proper stick doing its proper job. I put my hand on the sill and then on the workbench and then on the index card because it was his writing and mine. And I felt for a second like time, too, could be folded and put into a pocket if you were gentle. On my way back upstairs, I heard it again. The radio voice, the one that speaks like it knows the names of children in a town you can only visit by closing your eyes. It threaded through the vents and into the kitchen where Dee had lifted the latch already and was holding the door with her shoulder because it sticks. And we remember, don't, I said. Don't, I said to the voice in the house and myself and whatever part of me wanted to be a lesson in someone else's life. David! The voice said my name the way you say a person's name when they're taking too long to come down for dinner. Bentley barked again. One polite bark as if to say, they called you. As if to say, it's rude not to answer. I met Dee's eyes. She nodded once. And in that nod, everything we promised each other in rooms with better mornings. We stepped onto the porch together. The door swung to with a push from the air, then stuck on the latch. Then closed because houses like this know how to close. The key turned easily in my hand, like a friend who forgives you for leaving before the story's over. On the sidewalk, Oakview looked like a regular street that had never known anything but regular things. A kid on a bike, a woman tugging a trash bin, the neighbors 2 doors down hosing yesterday off his driveway, water angling into the gutter like mercy. We walked to the car and Bentley jumped into the back like he had built it for himself. I put the bag in the trunk, Dee got in and buckled, and she put her hand on my knee, grounding me to the part of the world that is not a parable. I turned the key. From inside the house, through the front windows and the upstairs one we'd forgotten to close, and the gentle leaks of the vent, the radio's voice floated out into October like a song your mother would hum when she was thinking of nothing in particular. And we remember those who went home in the night, it said, sure of itself. From Oakview and beyond, passed peacefully. The hallway clock answered with a single, precise tick that felt like a door closing in a wing of a house I'd never been allowed to see. I put the car in drive. We rolled forward, not fast, like people who have just left a room where something was decided without being discussed. Dee looked straight ahead, and I looked into the rear view at the house because, of course, I did. The curtains didn't move. Houses like that don't wave, but the front window held our faces for a second. A reflection that wasn't a reflection, and in it we looked not older exactly, but permanent. Halfway down the block, I stopped the car. It wasn't my idea. The stopping was in the street. It was in the day. I set my hands on the wheel and said the word I hadn't wanted. Listen. And we did. No sound, no radio, no clock, no dog tag. Just that new quiet that follows a decision. Oakview keeps the hour. It also keeps its promises. I put the car back in gear and we turned the corner, and the house was gone, because that's what happens to houses when you're not looking at them. They go on with their business. And we didn't talk. We didn't have to. We drove to the lake because that's as far as you can go without admitting you need an ocean. We sat on a bench while Bentley arranged the world in his nose. I felt very young and very old and exactly the right age all at the same time, which is the condition of loving and being loved by a place. When we went home to our home, not the house that insists it is, the evening was simple. We fed the dog, we washed the 2 mugs. We stood in the kitchen until standing became a kind of sleep. Dee put her hand on my chest and listened again for the station she likes to find. That night, in our bed, I turned out the lamp and let the dark be dark. I thought of the cookies I hadn't eaten and the paper I hadn't finished reading and the basement window I had propped. And for a moment, I let myself believe in a kindness I hadn't earned. Maybe that was the point. Maybe that's how you get to keep going after a house says your name. I hovered at the edge of sleep where the mind starts making bargains with itself. The room softened. The clock on my phone looked like someone else's time. Bentley sighed his bone-deep sigh. Dee's breath found its tempo. I was inside the minute where dream draws their borders and then erase them. And from the vent above our bed, our vent, new, clean, not connected to anything but our own long, quiet night, I heard the radio I had heard since I was 8, and again last night, and 1,000 nights I'd never counted. And we remember, the voice said, gentle as water on stone. The man who loved stories, who kept a key he didn't need and promise he didn't know he'd made. I opened my eyes in the dark and I saw nothing, and I saw everything. I could have woken Dee, I could have said her name, I could have turned on the lamp and proved to herself and myself that it was just a building settling or a truck 2 streets over or the blood in my ears doing that thing it does in the middle of the night when it likes to invent visitors. But I didn't. I lay very still as if stillness were politeness. The voice took a breath that didn't sound like breath at all, but like the first inch of paper being lifted off a desk. David, it said. And the way it said my name made my throat go thin, because it was not a stranger, and it was not my grandfather, and it was not anything that could put a return address on an envelope. It was the house, or every house, or the place that listens when you think nothing's listening. Good night. Something touched my hand, not skin, not cold. The weight of a newspaper folded politely and set exactly where a man would set it for the morning he's sure will come. I lay there with my eyes open and did not sleep, and did not sleep. In the minute where a dream chooses you, I thought two thoughts that were the same thought. We left, and we never did.